So yes, our next talk is by John Conrad, and I won't do a real long introduction here because we're going to talk to John afterward. I just want to note that I first met John maybe about 6 months ago when he actually reported a bug in my Apple II emulator. And he said, "Hey, my software that I wrote 40 years ago doesn't boot in your emulator." And I was like, shocked. But yeah, I started to, first I fixed the bug, and then I started to ask him about, well, what did he write? And found out that he had written a whole slew of educational software for the Apple II back in the day. And that started a long conversation, and here we are about 6 months later, and he's going to tell us all about his journey with the Apple II over the years. So let's go ahead and roll the video.
Hello to all of you out there at KansasFest 25, wherever you are, spread all over the country, maybe over the world a little bit even. I want to thank all the organizers of KansasFest 25 for this invitation. In particular, I want to thank Chris Torrence, who, I have to chuckle, it was just an amazing sequence of events that led to my getting to know Chris Torrence remotely, talking about emulator bugs and fixes, and he discovered who I was, maybe, and I said, yes, I was that John Conrad. Thank you, Chris, for this, for your interest in me. I have to confess that I've always known about KansasFest as an entity, but I never paid a great deal of attention to it. I think that's going to change in the future. If my contributions are of interest to this group, I think they may make more sense to you if I put them in the context of how I think the Apple II has affected all of my professional career. As I look back on it, I think maybe it affected it more than I even thought about. And it's been very gratifying and a lot of fun to go back through my boxes of Apple II stuff and looking at old things and remembering things that I had forgotten. So with that in mind, I'm going to start back in my high school years and cast you a story of my history in computing from high school to graduate school, and then my professional career, and then come back to the present day. So let me start at the beginning. I was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1947. I went to high school at LaSalle High School on the south side of San Antonio, a high school that sadly didn't last very long before the Christian brothers who started it there abandoned it. But I had a good experience there, and I had a very good physics teacher, Brother Titus, and it was at his urging, or somehow he made this happen. There was a Saturday morning enrichment set of classes at San Antonio Junior College out on San Pedro in San Antonio for several Saturday mornings that my mother faithfully drove me to. And it was my first exposure to some kind of computing. And it was, I can't find any record of those classes. I have no idea what the machine was. I assume it was a machine that was on the campus. Maybe it was an IBM rep doing some PR work. I don't know. But it was register arithmetic. I show here some of the command sets, and I won't bore you with what the coding forms look like. That's as much as I need to say about that. It was my first exposure to computing, and it was not exciting, and luckily I didn't give up at that point. But that was my first exposure. My second exposure to computing was much more fun, much more interesting. I graduated from LaSalle High School in 1964 and enrolled at St. Mary's University, a small liberal arts college in San Antonio, Texas. I majored in physics. I have a suspicion that if had they had an engineering major at the time, they do now, I might have majored in engineering, but I majored in physics, and I'm delighted that I did. And I had a very good experience. It was a small department. I believe my graduating class had only about a dozen students, and we had a small number of faculty. I am very grateful for the great physics I learned from Dr. Joe Rudolph, Brother Joe Rudolph, and from Dr. Homer Fetzer. I was a scholarship student, so the first year I had to work in the library, restacking books. But the second year and in subsequent years, I worked for the physics department, mostly under the tutelage of the chairman of the department, Brother William Ham, who was a amateur radio operator, as I was at the time. It turns out, more about that later. He was wonderful. He was an amazing man, and I think he somehow parlayed a deal with the registrar for some of the physics majors, some of us, to gain after hours, evenings and weekend access to the brand new IBM 1620 that showed up in the registrar's office, I think my sophomore, maybe my junior year. And we had, they gave us key to the registrar's office and showed us, Neil Kammer showed us how to boot the system and to punch cards and to compile cards. And we had access to that computer pretty much as we wanted, except at course grading time and transcript time. It was an amazing experience. I used to walk around with big boxes of punch cards, Fortran cards, and for better or for worse, my crowning achievement was to write a tic-tac-toe game that you could play against the computer. Matthew Broderick in War Games notwithstanding, the computer generally put X in the middle, and it would always defeat you. I remember very little of that. Needless to say, I don't have the punch cards, but I remember that there were 4 sense switches on the console of the 1620, and those somehow played a game, and it would type out the grid, the tic-tac-toe grid, on the typewriter at the console. An amazing experience. I graduated late in the summer of '68 and didn't get my degree. '69, I needed one extra course to get the graduation requirements, so I didn't graduate with my class. In fact, I never walked across the stage there. I decided I want to go to graduate school in experimental plasma physics. I thought I wanted to make power from nuclear fusion. That's the safe kind of nuclear power. It's so safe that it hasn't worked yet. The program was called Project Sherwood. The classified program was Project Sherwood, and the joke was that sure would be nice if fusion would work. I enrolled at Dartmouth College in the fall of 1968 and began what was to change my life in many, many ways, not the least of which was my discovery when I showed up on campus that Dartmouth had just started DTSS, the Dartmouth Time-Sharing System. John Kemeny, and who was the inventor of BASIC in some sense, had just started to install terminals around the campus, and that began the beginning of my new approach to computing. So I showed up at Dartmouth in the fall of 1968 and started graduate studies. I immediately started giving myself massive amounts of homework for things I didn't learn in undergraduate school compared to some of the other first-year students in physics. But I survived. But it was clear that Dartmouth time sharing was a big part of everything that was happening at Dartmouth, and John Kemeny was quite a force. He was a neat guy. He told great stories, and he drove a Thunderbird with the basic license plate New Hampshire plates. Dartmouth Timesharing had installed the Kiewit Computer Center had installed about 30 terminals in a big central room, and there were terminals all over the campus and quite a few on the physics campus, physics building, and a lot of the faculty had acoustic couplers to connect to at home. I had the great fortune to take a first course in mechanics, advanced course in mechanics from Arthur Luhrmann. Arthur Luhrmann, I wish I was in person here to ask for a hand raise to see how many people know about him in the world of computing, Apple computing. He's been everywhere. He was a PhD in crystallography, but he had a passion for computing, and he developed all kinds. He had a passion for trying to teach physics in terms of computational methods as well as rigorous theoretical methods. So I owe him a great debt. He was actually recognized at the time, but I didn't realize it. This is an interview with Arthur Luhrmann. It claims to be one of the few interviews with him in the Atari archive. And if you're interested in a few things I might tell you here, I recommend this. It's a kind of a cute little interview. Arthur developed and he was recognized in an editorial in Creative Computing in spring of 1983. This was an editorial kind of summarizing the history of microcomputing, or whatever you want to call it, leading up to the Apple II and the Ataris and the Commodores and TRS-80s and all that. So here's the beginning of the editorial, but quickly into the editorial, there's this section here where the word spread. Computers can be fun. Professors at Dartmouth are using a time-sharing system to teach physics. And rather than beat him, he was going to join him. A lot of the Dartmouth students were writing game programs, mostly just adventure games. There was very little graphics. But Art Luhrmann developed a game called Potshot, which actually I think was developed and maybe even sold or distributed somewhere. And it was projectile motion. And the first course that I took in mechanics from Arthur Luhrmann, he talked about how you solve ordinary differential equations numerically using Euler's methods, but using a half-step method, so that in addition to the first-order correction of the numerical calculation, you get a second-order correction. And we would solve Newton's law equations for numerical solutions that could not be obtained by closed form. And it was lobbing projectiles over a mountain and trying to hit a target on the other side. Arthur wrote that program and left Dartmouth before getting tenure, became the director of the Berkeley Hall, Lawrence Hall of Science in Berkeley, ended up co-writing a manual for the IBM PC Junior, which he mentions in the interview allowed him to retire early. But he's always been involved in applications of computers to education. An amazing man, and he had a big influence on my development. We come now to the second person that I interacted with at Dartmouth, my thesis advisor, John Edmund Walsh, who sadly died in the year 2000 after a freak skiing accident at the Dartmouth Skiway, blood clot. John was widely regarded as the father, one of the pioneers of the relativistic electron, free electron laser. My thesis experiment was, in a sense, a warm-up experiment, a low-energy 1 kilovolt electron beam energy propagating through a plasma and generating radio frequency waves. John was amazing, an amazing physicist, brilliant, personable, fun, down-to-earth, just an incredible guy. And he believed in me before I believed in me, and I owe him a great debt. Two computational activities related to my thesis influenced my computational development, one experimental physics, and the second computational physics. My thesis experiment was the propagation of a 1 kilovolt or so electron beam through a solenoidal plasma beam generated, and looking at the radio frequency waves and the effect of those waves on the distribution function of the propagation of the beam. This was the old days. We used XY recorders. We went through boxes and boxes of Polaroid film on Tektronix oscilloscopes. And I got pretty tired of hand reducing data, blowing up photographs and trying to digitize them by hand or pick numbers off those things. So I encouraged John to try and find us some way to do data acquisition, which was getting to be a big deal at the time. And somehow he came up with, maybe his henchman Bob Lehman came up with a Meyer Model 3 data acquisition system, which interfaced through the energy analyzer cup at the end of this experiment, and ended up punching a paper tape, which I could then carry to the Model 35 teletypes at the Dartmouth time sharing system to reduce that. I think it was surely the first experiment at Dartmouth that was data acquisitioned. The second aspect of what I had to do for my thesis was to produce numerical solutions of the two-dimensional Fokker-Planck equation in velocity space, partial differential equation. And I wouldn't have had a clue as to where to begin had it not been for the classes I had with Arthur Luhrmann. So we solved that partial differential equation with the experimental parameters using a velocity time grid like that, and just using time stepping, initial half-step time steps, and got very good results. That's all I'm going. Here's actually the program of that, of about a 10-page basic Dartmouth basic program that I see ran for 200 seconds in background on the time sharing system, and ran in background because it was a long running program. That was the extent of my computational experimental work at Dartmouth, and I had no idea what the future would hold for my work in computing. That brings me to the next step in my academic career, which is the postdoc that I held at University of Maryland, working with Herb Lashinsky at IFDAM, the Institute for Fluid Dynamics and Applied Mathematics, on a Q machine plasma. That year and a half, about 18 months stay at Maryland was totally devoid of computers. I know there were computers on campus, but Herb did not use them in his lab. He was pretty much old school. But what came of that, to my great fortune, was an appointment as an assistant professor in what was originally called the Department of Nuclear Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, doing at first experimental plasma physics, and then later on my team developed a process called plasma source ion implantation for surface modification of materials. And our patents started to develop quite a bit of interest. But more importantly, at the same time that I came there, in order to support the work in the experimental plasma physics areas, I acquired my first Apple II. And at that point, I was following kind of I didn't realize it at the time, but I was exploring two parallel career paths. My academic path in experimental plasma physics, and my side venture into the world of Apple II computing, purely accidental. I'm going to now spend barely a minute, with your indulgence, to describe my entire academic career at the University of Wisconsin. I joined the Department of Nuclear Engineering. The department changed its name twice while I was there. First to the Department of Nuclear Engineering and Engineering Physics. I was an and engineering physicist. And then finally we changed our name much later, towards the end, to the Department of Engineering Physics only, dropping the word nuclear, historical reasons. Much of my time was spent doing initially work on tandem mirror experiments, the Fader's tandem mirror experiment in the engineering research building on the campus, and also on the toroidal octopole. My students and I built neutral beam injectors to inject into the end cells of the tandem mirror for fueling and heating. The work I did there was relevant, but at some point I became somewhat disillusioned with the future of fusion plasma physics. And in a happenstance, I stumbled on a new technique for doing surface modification of materials, and my students and I developed an entire program based on increasing the material strength of materials, medical tools, industrial hardware, automotive applications, using a technique we described as and patented as plasma source ion implantation. We developed a fair amount of interest in this program, and one of the things that happened was a very productive cooperative research and development agreement, CRADA, C-R-A-D-A, a three-way collaboration between Los Alamos Labs, General Motors Corporation, and the University of Wisconsin. Here is, on the far right is me as a younger man. In the middle, to the right, is Dr. Joe Mantes at General Motors Research Labs. I think you recognize the tall gentleman to the left. Hiding behind his right shoulder is Don Ray, who is the director of the group at Los Alamos doing this work. That was very productive work, and that's all I'm going to say about my academic activities at the University of Wisconsin. You can Google me. Now to Ampergraph and Amperdump. When I arrived at the UW-Madison campus in the fall semester of 1975, I was somewhat disappointed by the access to computing. I was really spoiled by the Dartmouth time-sharing system at Dartmouth. Maryland wasn't in play, but I missed the access to Dartmouth time-sharing system. We did have heavy-duty computing, serious computing available to run big production codes. At Lawrence Livermore Lab, my students and I were running design codes, huge Fortran codes, to design the extractor grid sets for the neutral beam injectors we were building. But those were just black boxes, and we didn't write them and barely understood how they worked, but needed them. For smaller computing, there were some options. In particular, the nuclear engineering department had purchased a Hewlett-Packard microcomputer, big thing on a roll-around cart that was a shared facility for the 15 faculty members and some of their students. So I only had access to them for a few hours a week, and difficult at night and on the weekends. But what I really liked about that Hewlett-Packard microcomputer is it had a very good graphics package. It had a CRT display and a printer, and it had a system, I think it was called HPGL, if I remember, Hewlett-Packard Graphics Language. So embedded in the basic interpreter were commands for drawing simple graphs, which I needed to use just routinely for everything I was doing. So after several years, in 1978, I think was the year I purchased my first Apple II computer, and that was the beginning of what was to be what I still think of as a life-changing experience. The more I think about it, that first computer and what happened with it really formed a structure to my professional career that I sometimes think I didn't appreciate at the time. So how did that all go? I remember when I got my Apple II, especially when the IBM PC came out. I think that was several years later, maybe 1978, I'm not sure. I remember all the deans and my fellow colleagues made fun of my Apple II because I had been using it all along. They made fun of it, said, "What are you doing with that toy computer, John?" And so I laughed and they laughed. but I got a lot of things done. And then, of course, when the first Macintoshes came out, the whole situation turned around again. The deans were walking around with Macintoshes, portables when they became available, and that was payback a little bit. But here, let me tell you about Ampergraph and Amperdump, which I wrote for myself to begin with, but realized there might be a market for it. And I talked to the dean about whether I could promote this, and he said, sure, just let us know what you're doing with it. So here's how that story goes. Here is Soft Talk magazine. I kept just a handful of the old magazines. This is Soft Talk magazine, volume 3, May 1983, Herbie Hancock on the front page. And then on page 6 was the advertisers. On the inside front page was the advertisers index. And if you blow that up in the middle there, I'm sorry, it's bad copy, but about in the middle you see an advertisement for Madwest Software. There's one below it called Midwest Software, but I call mine Madwest Software to distinguish it from that. Madwest for Madison, Wisconsin. Madison, Wisconsin had the moniker at the time of Mad City. Cute, huh? So also curiously on that front page ad is an ad for almost a full page ad for Edu-Ware Services. That's the next part of my story. But I wrote these routines, the graphics routines and the dump routines, and started running ads in Soft Talk and InfoWorld and Call Apple. I think I don't remember exactly. Here's the ad for the blow up of the part of the ad for Ampergraph. It's a graphics language that has scale and draw, and it allows you to plot graphs nicely formatted with scales and scaling to transform the physical variables you were plotting into the high-res graphics screen of the Apple II. And so I wrote that. Here's Madwest Software, which was an answering machine in the basement of my first house in Madison on Allen Street. I bought an answering machine, and I got a Visa card and a MasterCard account to pay for it. Here's the graph. You see all the commands here that you could use with the ampersand. The ampersand was a command, if you remember, those of you who know AppleSoft, was just a jump to hex 3F5 where you could put something, okay, and process the string that followed that ampersand command to make your own commands. Here's a sample program. It's a very simple plot. Those 10 lines or so produce a graph that looks like this without much effort. Nothing particularly fancy about the programming. It was written in AppleSoft. People wondered how I did such amazing stuff in machine language or assembly language. It didn't. It was just AppleSoft, which I wrote and debugged in AppleSoft, and then relocated above, just tucked it under HiMem and reset HiMem in the memory map, so that once the user downloaded and ran a simple machine language loading program that loaded the assembly language code that did the transfer, it was transparent to him. And it worked pretty well. I just had a major revision in 1982, and of course you realize that those were the days before the internet and before email or anything like that, so all the correspondence was mostly by U.S. mail and occasionally a phone call, but it got there to me eventually. One of the problems with it is that originally, when I first wrote it, I simply had an old silent type printer, And to dump the graph, all you had to do was push the command for the silent type printer to dump it onto the page. But people started wanting to use it with other printers, dot matrix printers, as they appeared. So as time went on, after a very short time, I had to write an all assembly language program, Amperdump, which worked with shows your Epson FX80, Apple NECs, CETOs, and some other things. I think I wrote one for a Toshiba eventually. I taught myself just enough assembly language to be dangerous, but here's the assembly language code for the Toshiba and for a CETO and so on. So how did that all work? One of the things I had hoped to do in preparation for this presentation at KansasFest was to use the Apple IIc that was very generously gifted to me by Chris Torrence as a result of our interaction that I'll describe in the next section. Chris thinks he gave it to me. I think it's on long-term permanent loan to me. I told him I would, he said, use it as much as you can, and if you don't need it anymore, make sure it finds a good home. It was from a friend of his. But I had hoped to go through that and look at the stacks and stacks of old Apple Writer files and some data files that where I kept the accounting records of all my massive sales of Ampergraph and Amperdump. But I do remember the bottom line. I don't think I lost any money on Ampergraph and Amperdump, but every amount of revenue that I made selling it, it all went into advertising, and the ads were getting more and more expensive all the time. So I broke even on that. One nice feature of the experience was that I didn't realize this until much later, after the fact, but I found as a result of this interaction with Chris, and as a result of discovering this massive treasure trove called the Internet Archive, I found a review of Ampergraph just about 3 or 4 months ago, an InfoWorld review of someone who, Ross Adams, who don't know any idea who he was, who wrote a review of Ampergraph, and I'll just scan that real briefly. It was a 3-page review and then wrapped around a whole bunch of advertising, but he did a very nice job of reviewing. Told you that told you what an ampersand was and how it jumped to 3F5 hex in AppleSoft, and I think something he wrote later suggested that he thought it was a machine language code that followed that, and it was not. Okay, he described all the features of it. Here's that line of his thing. He says, his first impression wasn't so good. He didn't like it. He had 3 serious problems. These were performance problems as a result of the documentation. Sorry about that. But once he realized that, he actually liked it. He says the ease of commands is apparent with a simple program listing, and he wrote a simple program, wrote a short program to do the review to try it himself. And once again, he got an error message, but he realized it was an out of bounds value. So he was perplexed by that, or unhappy, and so he tried to call me. Okay, he says he looked up he didn't see a number for Madwest Software in the ads. I think the later ads actually had my telephone number. I didn't have a separate line or a telephone number at the beginning, but he left a message, and so the next day I called him back, and he called me and he talked to me, and I claimed that, which was true, that if I built all the error processing built in, it was already using up 7K of memory, and if I thought about putting more error checking in, but it just would have used up a lot of space, and most people I thought could live with it. So he bought my story, even though he said, well, it sure could cost people time. But here's the summary. He said, with its exception of its documentation, it's an excellent program. So that was kind of heartening. He gave me the following grade list. I got an A for performance, a C for the documentation, and maybe B's for ease of use and error handling. That shows the price at $24. That was the original one. That was kind of fun to see that. But then I discovered the other thing I'd hoped to do is to, as I mentioned, look through my old sales, because I remember some of the sales of Ampergraph went to interesting places. I sold one to Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. I sold one to many of the major research universities. I gave it away to all my colleagues on the Madison campus who found out about it and wanted a copy, so I gifted them copies. But I don't remember this one. I don't remember the sale of one to what ended up being Cornell University, because in Internet Archive I found this discussion of a book that was published called Apple II in the laboratory. And I actually ended up buying it on Abe's the book. I had to buy it from England because it was published by Cambridge University Press, and it was actually a textbook written by A.F. Kukes and B.G. Thompson in the what I think was the engineering physics department at Cornell University. Interestingly, a place that I had applied for a postdoc when I got the Maryland position, but didn't get. And it was interesting reading, because I got that book and it says, here's the nicest compliment that I could have gotten at all. It says, the middle text there says, the text also assumes that Madwest Software Ampergraph is being used. We have not seen comparable packages which could be substituted. Ta-da! So, well, that was kind of neat to see after all these years. Because, in fact, the interesting thing is, here is the chapter summary of chapter by chapter. Chapter 2 begins with a discussion of Ampergraph, and in fact it's a tutorial with all the instructions and defines all the parameters that you have to set for Ampergraph. So that was kind of fun. So that then kind of is the end of Ampergraph and Amperdump. And at that point, my kids, they were maybe 4 and 6 years old, they started playing with my Apple II, and they weren't playing with Ampergraph and Amperdump. They were playing with Apple Invaders and Choplifter and all of those iconic programs. They were playing a lot of games. So I thought maybe there surely must be some educational programs that I could encourage them to use. There weren't. So in my odd moments off time, odd moments here and there, which there were fewer and fewer of as my work with Infusion started to get really pretty busy. But I wrote some simple programs for them, some spelling and mathematical programs. And they developed a life of their own, and they got a little fancier, and I had fun, and my kids seemed to be vaguely interested in them. But just on an odd whim, I sent a sample copy of them to Edu-Ware Services, to Sherwin Steffin, who had just formed Edu-Ware Services in Agoura Hills, California. And I said, what do you think of these? And he wrote this amazingly, I can't find the letter, he wrote this amazing U.S. mail letter back to me, said they were very interested in them. They had already been publishing, I guess, some of their classic programs, Prisoner and maybe algebra, compumath things, but they had nothing for the early childhood market, and he would like to publish them. Well, to make a long story short then, and I'll go through it very quickly, he ended up publishing 4 of my titles. Spelling Bee and Counting Bee were the original 2 programs, drill and practice tutorial programs, and then 2 game-like programs, arcade-like programs. Nothing at all like Apple Invaders, but not more than drill and practice. And those 4 programs then got to be a very interesting time in my life, because for a time there, and there were a couple of months, maybe 1 quarter, where my royalty incomes from Edu-Ware were about the same as, possibly a little bit more than, my salary from the UW-Madison Department of Nuclear Engineering. It didn't last for a long time. Here's a brief historical summary of the history of all my Edu-Ware games. Here's the original packaging for Counting Bee and Spelling Bee. So here's the packaging for Counting Bee. The previous packaging showed the packaging for Edu-Ware. In 1983, Edu-Ware had grown so rapidly that Sherwin Steffin had decided to sell to Management Science America, and it didn't go well. The packaging and the marketing and the distribution was all taken over by Peachtree Software, which was, a big accounting firm, and the Edu-Ware stuff got lost in that shuffle. It did not go well. Ended up with a bunch of lawsuits for Sherwin Steffin, which I was, of course, not privy to. Anyway, that's old history. Some of this is in the Wikipedia article that is on Edu-Ware. Here's the original program, Spelling and Reading Primer, Introduction to Counting, and then Spelling Bee Games, and finally Webster's Numbers. Counting Bee were pretty traditional drill and practice kind of things. I'm not going to bore you taking any time to show you them, but I will spend a few minutes each on Spelling Bee Games and Counting Bee Games, the arcade-like games. First of all, Spelling Bee Games. Here's a real quick look at Spelling Bee Games. Edu-Ware created a new division called Dragonware for the early childhood thing, and they had hoped that I would keep developing more games like this. Given what happened with Peachtree Software, that kind of went down the tubes a little bit. Here's Spelling Bee Games, 4 games. The first game is 2 players flying airplanes from the picture that they have to find the target. All the pictures here, the graphics, as you can tell, are very primitive. Edu-Ware initially wanted me to convert all those to full color, with as many colors as Apple had, vector graphics images, and I told them that just wasn't going to happen. There were about 250 pictures for the Spelling Bee drill and practice program, which were inherited, of course, by the games program, and they were just line drawing. I had access to an Apple graphics tablet enough to do those things, and that made that fairly easy to do. I took many of the pictures, stole them from open source or copyright-free drawings. The worst ones that you see there are my hand drawings. I'm not a particularly good artist. Multiplayer games, 1-player games, 2-player games. Edu-Ware wrote a configuration package at the end of these. Here's Webster's Numbers now. Counting kind of things. 4 games, some multiplayers, one of them some of them single player or 2-player games. These I used shapes, and I think I used Graphics Magician by the cast of characters that includes Mark Pelsarsky, who I know was a speaker here. This is a balloon racing game. The player on the left has 4 squares. He has to fly his balloon by pushing the button down to let gas into the thing and then release it to let it float down. He has to fly to his balloon without hitting a cloud, because it's a thunderstorm and it'll explode his balloon. He has to return to the home game. Here's a shooter game, kind of a tile forcing game. The collisions here obey perfect physics for energy and conservation momentum. This game does that. It's matching shapes, and here's the same kind of idea. Using this is a two-player game, a player on the bottom and a player on the top, and the idea is to punch the numbers into sequence, the right sequence, and you get the idea. The next game is a rip-off of Pac-Man, kind of the little mosquito is the player. The player's trying to fly his mosquito, the purple mosquito, from his safe house to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on safe houses around, all the time avoiding the frogs that want to gobble him up. The audio you hear here, if it comes through the way I need it to, is me saying ribbit, ribbit. Finally, a piece of software that I developed in collaboration with Pat Dixon, friend and colleague at UW-Madison in the Department of Child and Family Studies. Pat was interested in preschooler. The idea is that the toddlers would see little animals in various spatial relationships. Sadly, Pat and I had signed a publication agreement for this piece of software with Reston Publishing, but just about that time, Reston got acquired by Prentice Hall, and this got lost in the shuffle. At least we got to keep the advance. So now, while the wizard is showing you his wizardry and getting ready to collect his animals in his courtyard, for the sake of history and completeness and symmetry, before I tell you the story of how I got acquainted with Chris Torrence, which resulted in this KansasFest talk invitation, I need to tell you about my second career in academics. In 2003, after 28 years of teaching at the University of Wisconsin, for personal reasons, I decided to take somewhat early, after 28 years, early retirement. So I retired as Wisconsin Distinguished Professor Emeritus, and for personal reasons went to South Carolina. I ended up teaching a course at Furman University, and that led to a whole new range of academic applications of computing and some fun I had teaching undergraduates instead of graduate students. I'm going to very briefly tell you that story. I was originally hired as an adjunct, but thanks to the intervention of the wonderful friend, Dr. Bill Baker, chairman of the department at the time, I ended up retiring actually in 2020 with full retirement benefits. Thanks, Bill. In early 2012, Atmel Corporation, the maker of the microchips for the Arduino boards, announced a competition to be held at Maker Faire, New York City in 2012. So I formed a robotics team with some of my best students. They built this robot, and they ended up winning second prize in that competition against a bunch of universities that had advanced degree programs even in robotics engineering. So they did very well. This is how I met Bob Martin, who worked for Atmel, the maker of the chips for the Arduino. Bob Martin was so impressed with our undergraduates that he came to campus to give a one-day special topics course on robotics. 2 years later, in 2014, the Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Society announced a university competition, so I formed a drone team out of a subset of the robotics club. The team actually ended up in Bend, Oregon, winning first prize, which was a DJI Heavy Lifter S8, a very nice prize, and one of the students actually earned a job out of the competition. During the same time period, I taught myself to write in processing, which is kind of Java plus C++. I wrote an application called Lexahedron. I have published about 10 crosswords in the New York Times, so I wanted to try my hand at this. I paid a handful of New York Times constructors to write some of them. Never really caught on, but I may get back to it.
Hello. Before we start getting into details, just sit back and relax. I'll show you Lexahedron in action. I'll be quiet.
In the middle of the fall semester of 2019, COVID hit, and I was teaching 2 lab courses. I wanted my students to be able to do some labs at home. So I had the weird idea to hack the sensor board, the Bluetooth sensor board from a Sphero Mini, little rolling spherical robot. So I started to look at that. Sphero Corporation ended up donating 50 Sphero Minis to me, and I took them apart, and my wife and I packed them up along with some components to make 44 lab kits that could be mailed out to the students at home. And it actually worked pretty well. Here's one of the labs, which is a cylinder rolling down a hill with the sensor board taped to the Coke can. Here's the data from the Bluetooth sensor board. We developed 6 labs in total, and I wrote up some Mathematica lab manuals and some Mathematica analysis tools. The students didn't know how to use Mathematica, but they learned as part of this. The students, for the most part, thought it was a good thing. It was a lot of work for my wife and myself and for the students, but they had a lab experience those 2 semesters. When the dust settled, I finally wrote up this article and published it in the Physics Teacher. This is probably the last paper I will write for a refereed academic journal. You can find out more about this on the Furman Physics YouTube channel. I'll conclude this Furman section with a comment that although I'm fully retired from Furman, I'm trying to stay a little bit active out there. I played an extremely minor role in this balloon launch experiment to measure muons. This work was done by my former colleague Dave Moffett, a professor at Furman, and one of our former students, now a high school teacher, Bob Anderson. David remembered that I was an amateur radio operator and asked if he could use my amateur radio license credentials to do the telemetry for the position and altitude. So you can see my K5 FPS general class license amateur radio transmitter transmitting from near the edge of space. When I finally retired, after all those years of teaching, I started to turn my attention to some projects that I'd been putting off for a long time. One of those projects was a desire to have my grandchildren be able to use my old Edu-Ware software and the Reston Wizard of Ware software. But I no longer had an Apple II of my own, nor did my children. I didn't want them to have to buy Apple IIs. So I started to look at turn my attention to the emulator market. I'd been following that over the years, and when I had tried it early, maybe 10 years ago, or however long it was, many of my programs would not run on those emulators. I used Microsoft Task Compiler to run the game programs. I don't know if that was part of the problem or what it was. But when I re-examined that market again in about a year ago, I realized that the emulators had become quite sophisticated and very good. But I wanted my grandchildren to have access to real individual game paddles the way the original software worked. These are the game paddles I made with an Arduino Micro Pro, and the joystick, same thing. And I wrote that up as an Instructables.com, and I'm going to spend just a minute or so describing that. There's nothing revolutionary there. It's actually absolutely garden variety Arduino programming, but maybe it's useful to the community, so I'll spend just a second talking about that now. Here is the article that I published at Instructables.com. I'll give the reference in the Discord section for the KansasFest here. As I said, the absolutely garden variety programming and hardware. I use the Arduino Micro Pro, and then I made up a batch for all the sets of grandchildren. As I was finishing up the Instructables post, I returned again to the question of which emulator to recommend, and for some reason I had not discovered Apple II TS by Chris Torrence. As soon as I did, I realized this is the very best one of all, and I was getting ready to recommend it, but I discovered 2 issues. One, just a clicking noise, which turned out to be my error, but another fatal error that was crashing only one of the games on one of the products. So I sent Chris an email, and he started looking at it. I discovered my own problem, but he started to look at the other one. And early in the game, he sent me this email on his GitHub page, And he said, "Is this game yours?" And I said, "Yes, guilty as charged." And that's me. So he kind of liked that. In this post here, I discovered what my problem was. But he kept looking at the other issue, and he ran it on his real Apple IIe. He thought maybe the problem was with the Apple IIe as opposed to the Apple II Plus that came out first. And he ran it on his IIe on his system. Here's his fancy system. Sure enough, it ran just fine. So he realized there was a problem in his emulator. Within a couple of days, he must have worked 24 hours a day overtime at night to discover this, but he discovered a rather bizarre error somewhere here. Here's it crashing, where it crashed, and the disassembly of the machine code. And then finally, on March 18th, he sent me this email saying that he had fixed it. And it was a very weird bug, and I'll let you read this material here. I don't claim to understand exactly what's going on, but some bizarre random number generator inside the sound generator was conflicting and crashing his emulator. He fixed his emulator, and he noticed also that Virtual 2 had the same problem. I had discovered many other problems with Virtual 2. But anyway, he fixed it, and the rest is history. He ended up fixing it, and we got to correspond a little bit. He asked me if I wanted any more improvements, and I said it would be great if he could change the speeds to many more graduations of speeds, and the most recent release has that included. So thank you for that also, Chris. So that's that story. He ended up inviting me to KansasFest, and that's why I'm giving you this talk here today. Let me now spend just a few minutes showing you the first chance I had to show these to my grandkids. The oldest grandchild is a rising senior at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So she's a little old for these games. Sorry, Lily. But I had a chance to show it to Mac and Zach and Naomi this summer, and I'll just give you a kind of a brief capsule of their experiences. So what do you think the word is?
Monkey.
Do you think it's monkey? Here's Naomi using Counting Bee along with my son, some of the drill and practice things. You notice smiley faces and happy faces and frowning faces for yes and no. Not very good pedagogy, but what did I know? I was just a physicist, not an educator. Here's the concentration game with my son. Here is Mac and Zach playing the rivet game, and here they are playing the hot air balloon game. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my talk at KansasFest. I want to thank all the organizers of KansasFest, especially Chris Torrence for his help during the USB Instructables post and for his invitation here. I want to thank all the developers of all the emulators in the past, especially Melanie and April Ayers Griffiths, whose emulator, Micro 8, I used before I discovered Chris Torrence. I want to thank all the people who have contributed to Internet Archives, especially this mysterious 4AM who has archived all of my Edu-Ware stuff, along with so many other things. Wonderful contribution. I should have mentioned this back when I was discussing my software, but I especially want to thank the creators of the graphics magician, Chris Jakobson, David Lubar, and Mark Pelzarski, who I know was a speaker here recently. I used their graphics magician for all of the animations and the spelling bee games and counting bee games activities. Thank you very much. I want to end with two quotes from a very famous developer, Alan Kay. His two famous quotes are, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." A somewhat lesser, but also well known to the maker community, is his quote about the maker movement. He said, "We make not to have, but to know. We make not to have, but to know." I'm aware of the issues facing KansasFest right now in terms of attracting younger people to your wonderful hobby. And I just want to conclude by saying that I applaud what you're doing to keep this legacy alive in attracting new people, and remind you what you know better than I do, that the Apple II is a wonderful maker tool. We make not to have, but to know. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John, for that awesome talk. It was great to hear the history of both your career, and I thought it was really fun how you kind of looked back and realized kind of after the fact the connections that the Apple II had kind of led for you, where at the time, of course, you didn't think about it at all. So real quick, if we could just have maybe one or two questions, and then
Sure.
okay, great. So first question, was Ampergraph perhaps, this is by Jeremy Rand, was Ampergraph perhaps inspired by the graphing functionality you mentioned?
Yes, absolutely.
HP used. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I put all that stuff in about my career. I'm sorry, I'm trying not like a smart ass, but I was trying to make connected, and I didn't make the connections maybe very clear, but that was directly because of the, that HPGL language. Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right. Next question. So this one's a little complicated maybe, but it says, yeah, from Eric, can you talk about the process you went through to set up your company and produce and distribute your own products?
Yeah, I made it up as I went along. Listen, I didn't even, there was no incorporation. It wasn't not for profit or whatever, or what's the word? I didn't do it. I just started doing it. I took it on an ad, and it was me, and and my dad actually at one time he came and helped me run off disk copies and print it. I didn't know what I was doing.
I guess related to that, I have a question. So you mentioned the one phone call that you got from the reviewer. Did you get many other phone calls that you remember?
A handful. Mostly yeah, no.
Yeah, that's great though. I mean, did you get anybody who called and actually said, "Hey, we really love your software," or was it almost always like they had a bug?
Of course not. No, they were all complaining about something. Listen, this was just a side venture. I didn't really think, and I had nobody else there to answer the phone. It was a whim, and as I said, I didn't make any money on it, but I learned a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, I think that's it for the questions. But John, so yesterday we did the Apple II Forever Awards. However, today we want to, since you're here in person, so on behalf of the Apple II and the KansasFest community, I have the honor of presenting the Apple II Forever Award to John Conrad. John was an early adopter of the Apple II computer and was a pioneer in the development of educational software. His first creation was a scientific plotting utility called Ampergraph. He then wrote numerous games for Edu-Ware Services, such as Spelling Bee games, Counting Bee, and Webster's Numbers. After a 40-year career in physics, John went on a mission to allow his grandchildren to play his educational games. As part of this, he published an Instructables demonstrating how to connect a modern USB game controller to an Apple II. John, thank you for all of your contributions to the Apple II computer over the years, and we look forward to your future creations.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. Look, you granted 2 of those awards to Dan Bricklin and Jeff Mazur. Their contributions to the canon of Apple II literature, my contributions pale in comparison to those. So I'm amazed, I'm deeply honored, and I'm humbled by it. I thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. And as you know, I've only known about KansasFest really for the last 6 months or so, but I think I'm going to I'd like to see Kansas someday.
Excellent.
We're not in Kansas anymore or something about that. Thank you so much for your support of me and your help with the program.
Yeah. We'd love to see you in person. So hopefully
I would love to be there. We will all be there next year. Please do it in person.